the United Nations Development Program's Global Youth Team. This webinar is on the 16 by 16 initiative, which we have launched in April 2019 with support by the government of Italy. My name is Noelia Richard. I lead the youth team and I'm based in New York. And manage with my colleague here, Maria, this new initiative to recognize, promote, and support the work of 16 youth-led organizations, movements, and networks advancing SDG 16. You will hear a bit more about who these 16 are: champions of human rights, anti-corruption, social accountability, young peace builders, young activists making a difference at local, national, regional, and global level. We will have some time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. So please, if you have a question, type it. And we will make sure to get back to you. If by any chance we do not have time to answer all the questions, we will remain at your disposal to discuss offline or to discuss via email and get back to you. So before diving right in, I want to warmly welcome everyone who has joined. Thank Maria also in my team who's with me here in New York. I also want to ask attendees and speakers to please make sure that you're muted if you're not speaking, so that we ensure that the sound is clear and maximize the experience. I'll briefly explain what the 16 by 16 initiative is about and what we've been up to since April 2019 before giving the floor to my colleague Maria, who will present the results from the recent online consultation that we co-hosted with the major group for children and youth in the lead up to the Rome Preparatory Conference on SDG 16 in May 2019. We will then have a conversation with 4 members of the 16 by 16, Antonina, Emmanuel, Lynn Rose, and Neville, and I will introduce them in a few minutes. Just to go back quickly to go to the objectives of the initiative. I think it's pretty straightforward that there is a need to do better when it comes to youth participation and youth empowerment. So specifically, the 16 by 16 initiative has 3 main objectives: recognize and make visible young people's agency and leadership in the context of SDG 16 through a global campaign, a global 16 by 16 campaign, highlighting, spotlighting, illustrating the work that 16 youth-led organizations or entities accomplished to advance SDG 16. It is also meant to expand existing and open new channels for youth meaningful participation in SDG implementation, monitoring, and review as a whole, with a particular focus on SDG 16 and related frameworks. And last but not least, it is a way to enhance capacities and youth inclusive policy and programming, working more in partnerships with youth-led organizations. The initiative, as I said, was launched by the UNDP Youth Global Program in April 2019 with support by the government of Italy, with whom we have a number of initiatives underway on youth. It is also a response to recent normative frameworks, which we're very glad to see are highlighting the positive role that young people play. So namely the 2030 agenda and the particular focus on SDG 16, the UN Security Council resolutions 2250 and 2419 on youth, peace and security. And it is also meant to be a contribution to the UN Youth Strategy, which was launched in September 2018 by the Secretary General, Youth 2030. The initiative is triggered also by the recognition that there is not only a need to respond to youth-specific needs in the context of Agenda 2030 or SDG 16, but it is also important to value and to better support the young women's and young men's expertise, knowledge, and positive contribution to SDG 16 implementation or monitoring and accountability. It is, in fact, a timely initiative as well in 2019 in the context of the review and follow-up and other processes in particular, given the focus on SDG 16 at the ECOSOC Youth Forum, in the HLPF, and the preparatory conference that took place in May, and the SDG Summit that will take place in September. I will simply, in this slide and the next one, show you the connection with the UN Youth Strategy. So as I said, the first ever UN Youth Strategy was launched in September 2018. And it's really a recognition that young people should be at the heart of all the UN pillars, with a specific focus on prevention, a very clear emphasis on the role that young people play as positive actors in decision making. So in other words, it's a contribution to three of the main priorities of the strategy. The fact that we need to amplify youth voices for the promotion of a peaceful, just, and sustainable world, emphasizing the importance of youth engagement, participation, and advocacy. It is also a contribution to the protection and the promotion of the rights of young people and the support of their civic and political engagement. And it is also really connected to the pillar that has to do with young people being catalysts for peace and security and humanitarian action. Also to make reference to very important processes or recent data also that was brought to the forefront. It is also a response to the recommendations from the progress study on youth peace and security, which was launched as well in 2018 in response to the UN Security Council resolution 2250 called the Missing Piece. If you haven't read it, you should totally do so. It's also available on youth4peace.info. By the way, the webinar is being recorded and the slides will be made available, so you will have all the key links and references also at the end of the presentation. The Missing Piece specifically emphasizes the importance of moving from the violence of exclusion to meaningful inclusion, the importance of investing in youth capacities and in youth-led initiatives, and the need to just be better at partnering and collaborating with young people and by seeing them as partners for peace. It is also in line with our recent report called Frontlines, which was launched as well in May 2019, which applies a 2250 lens to the prevention of violent extremism agenda. And some of the 16 by 16 members in particular are heavily involved with national action plans or with local work contributing to the prevention of violent extremism. And it is as well accessible on our platform. Last but not least, just to mention the ECOSOC Youth Forum, because at the ECOSOC Youth Forum in 2018, this year, 19, sorry, there was a particular emphasis on SDG 16, mirroring the priorities of the HLPF. And the conversations clearly highlighted the importance of promoting meaningful participation, inclusion of youth, strengthening education on the rights to fight corruption, on the promotion of access to justice and human rights for young people, and also highlighted even more that investing in youth in the context of SDG 16 was going to be an enabler, if not the enabler, for SDG implementation. So how did we go about the selection process? How did we come to having this wonderful group of 16 young people? Actually, we did an open call. It was very important for us to reach out to more young people than the ones that we see at conferences. And it was really important to have this local anchoring, national anchoring of this SDG 16 work. So we did an open call for a bit less than 2 weeks, and received. We were quite surprised and impressed by the very high rate of responses, and we received more than 1,300 applications, of which we longlisted about 400. And then we also requested some nominations from our UNDP regional offices and in partnership with some country offices to ensure that we would have the diversity, both in terms of what targets we were looking at, and in terms of profiles, in terms of gender equality and gender parity, etc. We also partnered. It was important to have the perspective and the input from a Global Youth Constituency, the UN Major Group for Children and Youth, with whom we collaborated very closely to identify the 16 candidates. We had a very detailed scoring system and really paid attention to balancing different criteria. And in fact, having participated in a conference with the UN was not necessarily what made you being selected, but we really wanted to go beyond the usual suspects and really value the fact that young people at the local level were having leading positions or really were playing leading roles in leading initiatives that were youth-based and youth-focused. So here are the 16 by 16. We have participants from Brazil, from Honduras, from Jamaica, from Venezuela, from Bosnia and Herzegovina, from Moldova, from Ghana, Kenya, Malawi, Togo, Fiji, Nepal, the Philippines, Solomon Islands, Egypt, and Tunisia. So as you can see, it's like a very broad spread with 9 young women and 7 young men. And 4 of them will be introduced to you very shortly. Just to highlight a few of the milestones that we have lined up for phase 1. This is the first phase of the 16 by 16, which is already funded and is under implementation at the moment. So we did launch the 16 by 16 call for application, selected the group, ensured the participation of the group at the pre-conference and the conference on SDG 16, which took place in Rome. And we're right now doing this webinar and producing a number of blogs and looking into the development of collaborative tools in the context of SDG 16 implementation. Some of the members will also join us for the HLPF. Within one of the members also will speak at the Security Council on Youth, Peace and Security on the 17th of July. And more of them will join us during the SDG Summit and collaborate with us on a number of national projects and regional projects as well. Just a quick word on the Rome Youth Call to Action, which will be a recurrent point in our conversation. This is a call to action that the 16 by 16 has developed based on the online consultation that took place in May, and based on the conversations and on their own consultations on youth and SDG 16 during the Rome conference and beyond. So this is a call to action that was presented at the closing of the SDG 16 prep conference as an input to the HLPF, which is embedded in the report that is going to the HLPF and which is available on Youth for Peace website. It tackles important issues related to peace, justice, and inclusion, and also has a specific emphasis on the positive role that young people play in monitoring and accountability and in partnerships and financing. It is also an input for the SDG Summit, but also something that can guide policy and programming moving forward. And in the panel, we will come back to that and to the key points. So here you have key references, as I said, that will be included in the slides that will be made available to you, and also you will have our contact information. I just wanted to now pass the floor to Maria, who will talk about the online consultation I referred to, and after that we will start the panel with Antonina, Emmanuel, Lynn, Rose, and Neville, who are all 16 by 16 participants, and thank you very much. Maria, you have the floor, and you have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Noelia, and hello, everyone. I will share with you the results of the online consultation on youth and SDG 16, which were held in May 2019 this year. So the online consultation was co-convened by the UN Major Group on Children and Youth and UNDP. And this offered an opportunity for young people to feed into the 16 by 16 initiative and the Rome Youth Call to Action, which we will hear more about later. And as Noelia mentioned, I'm a program analyst on youth empowerment with UNDP. And I will just, before we go into the results, share a little bit about how this online consultation was made. And the questions of the online consultation really builds on insights from previous consultations, recommendations, statements, and principles, such as the recommendations from the ECOSOC Youth Forum session on SDG 16 and the guiding principles for supporting young people as critical agents of change in the 2030 agenda, which were developed by the Interagency Group on Youth and SDGs. In the questionnaire, this was articulated around 4 sections: getting to know the respondents, so some background questions, then secondly, mapping youth-led actions, and thirdly, key youth challenges and opportunities, and lastly, key policy recommendations. The consultation was launched in the context of the huge interest that Noelia just mentioned in the 16 by 16 initiative, and also due to the timing of the review of SDG 16 this year and the forthcoming SDGs Summit. So in this presentation, we're just going to highlight a few of the results, but not go into greater detail. So first of all, let's have a look at the respondents. So the 270 young people completed the questionnaire, and more than 320 opened the questionnaire. And this consultation was online for just 5 days. The average age of the respondents is between 27 and 28 years. More men than women participated in the consultation, and the majority of the respondents consider themselves knowledgeable and with experience working on SDG 16, which we saw when 34% chose 10 on a 1 to 10 scale of how familiar they are with SDG 16, as well as more than half of the respondents have been part of VNR processes, that is the voluntary national review processes. So as for the geographic, we have respondents from more than 80 different countries, with all regions represented. We also ask a few questions about how the young respondents are working on SDG 16, and 90% of the respondents are from youth-led organizations, networks, platforms, or initiatives. More than half of the respondents are part of civil society organizations or a non-profit. The majority of the respondents have a leading role or a role with responsibilities in their organization, network, platform, or initiative. Such responsibilities can be team leader, coordinator, and so forth. We were also trying to get to know how the respondents were working on SDG 16. So we asked what particular targets they are involved in. And especially SDG 16 target 16.7 stood out. This is the one on ensure responsive, inclusive, and representative decision making. This was followed by ending all forms of violence, protection of children from all forms of violence, and the promotion of rule of law. Then we asked which of the following areas more generally the participants were involved in, and peace and human rights stood out as the areas where the respondents are most involved. To the question of how they were involved, respondents answered that they are mostly involved with SDG 16 work through education, training, advocacy programs and projects, and to a lesser extent, they were involved through research, coordination, data, and monitoring, even though it should be said that a lot of people were involved in this as well. So moving from who the respondents for this consultation were, and to the barriers for youth empowerment and implementation of SDG 16. We asked what the current barriers is to the follow-up of political commitment to concrete actions and implementation of SDGs in general and SDG 16 in particular. Here, the lack of participation of especially youth in decision-making is recognized as the main barrier. And this was followed by lack of political will and commitment, as well as lack of trust between government and society. what we saw was that less participants noted violence and crime as a barrier to the implementation of SDG 16. Then we also asked, what are the barriers to support youth empowerment for peaceful, just, and inclusive societies? Here again, participation and decision-making came to the fore, as lack of access to decision-making and exclusion from development and peace processes are recognized as main barriers, as well as a lack of recognition of and support to young people's specific needs, notably in regard to sustained and relevant funding and proper tools. So this really reconfirms a finding from the independent progress study on youth, peace and security, that exclusion and mistrust are challenges for youth in relation to both youth, peace and security, but also SDG 16. And then moving to the role of young people in the implementation, monitoring and follow-up of SDG 16. Participation and governance at all levels were identified by respondents as the best option for youth to hold accountable their leaders. Also, awareness raising stands out as an important option for youth to hold accountable. Then we also asked what young people can do to take lead in implementation. And the main answer was that young people will take the lead if they're given a role and responsibility. But what was also mentioned were that young people can mobilize, organize, engage in peer-to-peer learning, engage in evaluation and monitoring with sensitivity to local context, as well as advocacy, awareness raising, outreach, and partnerships. We had a number of questions on what support to youth could look like, and the young respondents answered, and I'm just going to mention a few, would be that in relation to financing and funding, the respondents called for better funding rather than more funding. So this means that more funding is here understood as greater amounts of funding, but what was really called upon were more opportunity, better tailored funding, and funding for capacity development. In addition to that, we asked some questions on capacity development, and here capacity development for youth-to-youth initiatives are identified as the most relevant, as well as multi-level initiatives and peace and human rights education. Of course, we should remember that peace and human rights education is also an area where a lot of the respondents are actively involved. As for leaving no one behind, the people of lower socioeconomic status are perceived as being most at risk of being left behind by the respondents, then followed by youth and rural communities. So this really shows us that the consultation, that it is beyond youth talking about youth, but really looking into different groups in society. When we ask how can young people, the UN governments and other youth-specific and other stakeholders make the voices of the most marginalized heard and ensure that youth-specific needs are addressed in the implementation, follow-up and review of SDG 16, the respondents indicated that most important is to raise awareness in communities. This being campaign activities, events, conferences, workshops, support local champions and so forth. And this was also evident when we asked to data collection and analysis, because meeting in communities were highlighted as the best way of collecting and analyzing data on peaceful, just and inclusive societies. So this both shows a close link between SDG 10 and SDG 16, but it also shows a real emphasis on local action and knowledge by the young people in this consultation. And we asked about gender and young women's empowerment in the context of SDG 16. And a lot of the answers here were really linked to inclusion, non-discrimination, human rights, broader participation, civic space, and what have come up in other parts of the consultation as well. But some were also highlighted in relation to youth, peace and security, and women, peace and security, the linkages there, as well as gender-sensitive programming. So there were some elements that stood out And I'm just going to share one quote from the consultation with you. First, by adopting a gender approach in all the activities implemented in the framework of SDG 16, we will see youth and young women's empowerment. And also by having a gender section in every other aspect, being education, climate, and development. So as said, we will not go into depth with all the results of this consultation, and I'm just going to very briefly share with you a few of the recommendations in regard to peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. And for peaceful societies, let me start with a quote. If all these people work together, it can ensure peace in society, which came across very strongly in the consultation, both in regard to the call for multi-stakeholder partnerships and multi-dimensional and multi-level partnerships and initiatives, but also a call for the recognition of young people's ability to foster inclusivity, as well as young people and young peace builders' ability to ensure accountability and increase trust in society, which was also a recommendation we heard at the ECOSOC Youth Forum earlier this year, where it was highlighted that young people can foster a common vision of society and bridge divides. As for just societies, there were some quite direct recommendations when we asked about access to justice and effective rule of law, as well as how young people can contribute to reduce corruption and bribery. The answer was simple. Follow the law, promote human rights, and do not participate in corruption and bribery. Rather simple. Of course, we also had a lot of more detailed answers, and let me just read out one quote as an example. Set up accountability platforms that are semi-formal, using the people as your support system. The more the people, the more bent the legal institutions to create policies and enforce the ones created for justice and the rule of law. A democratic system is all about the people. And this was also evident for one of the recommendations coming across, that it is really about people-centered approaches. And before we wrap up, I'll just share with you one quote from the inclusive societies and the recommendations for these. Making all inclusive, favorable laws considering the most vulnerable. By youth engagement and community dialogues to involve the grassroots. Also really showing what came across the whole consultation, that there is a call for reaching those first behind, the most vulnerable, and the community level is really coming to the fore. So this was just a brief snapshot of some of the results from the consultation, and I think we can see that talking about youth and SDG 16 is really both about how youth empowerment can bring progress to SDG 16, but also how progress on SDG 16 can promote youth empowerment. So this was it. I'll give the floor to Noelia. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. So as Maria said, you will have more details to look at on the slides, and feel free also to reach out to us if you would like more information. So now we will move to the panel of the famous now 16 by 16. I will briefly introduce the 4 members of the 16 by 16 group who are with us today. So on the slide you see from left to right, Antonina, Emmanuel, Lynn, Rose, and Neville. I will introduce them before giving them the floor so that you can see also the diversity of issues that they're dealing with. So Antonina Rishko-Porcescu is the secretary of Eval Youth, a global network of and for young people, which unites young and emerging evaluators from all around the world for the inclusion of youth and young people into evaluation, offering capacity development opportunities, mentoring, webinars, e-conferences, and supporting young evaluators' empowerment in professional organizations. She is also the initiator and the co-chair of the regional chapter of EVAL Youth in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and South Caucasus. She has a PhD in sociology from the Institute of Sociology, NAS, Ukraine, and is experienced in social research and evaluation, civil society empowerment, advocacy campaigns, evidence-based policies, youth involvement into evaluation, as I said. Emmanuel Ametepe from Ghana is the executive director of Youth Advocates Ghana. He's also a development consultant working on governance, on youth empowerment, on participation. He has worked as the country director for Voice Africa's Future, now called the Citizens Report, a Pan-African initiative specifically looking at empowering young people to better deliver on the Agenda 2030. He was a mentor also for Restless Development's Accountability Advocates project, which looks at empowering young people with knowledge, skills, and networks to analyze official data, but also to generate their own data in order to track progress towards the achievement of the SDGs. And in 2017, Emmanuel launched the African Youth SDGs Forum as the largest forum on SDGs in Africa, with 1,400 delegates of young leaders and policymakers from Africa and beyond. So in this case, not a member states driven forum, but really a youth space that can be a rallying point for civil society, local governments, local UN partners, etc. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Development Studies from the Presbyterian University College and an Executive Certificate in Development Policy and Practice from the Cape Town University in South Africa. Third is Lynn Rose Jane Hannon, who is a member of the Executive Council of an organization called Young Women Plus for Peace and Leadership, which is a network of young women and young LGBT leaders from the Philippines who are agents of change and advocates of human rights, women's rights, gender equality, and peace and security. She is also the co-director of the project called YACAP, Youth Amplifying, Co-Creating, and Advocating Peace, a youth leadership development program for peace, which envisions to build a network of young people in Mindanao with a view to nurturing the culture of peace. She's a faculty member at the Department of English in the Mindanao State University, where she also teaches public speaking and peace education. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in English and a Master of Arts degree in Culture and Arts Studies, and focuses on youth leadership, education, and peace. And last but not least, Neville Charlton. Neville is the founder and chairman of Youth Inspiring Positive Change Limited Positive Org, a registered non-governmental organization in Jamaica that engages youth in development, in volunteerism, social change, peace building, and related areas. The organization trains young people around social issues, creating space for growth and empowerment of Jamaican youth. He has collaborated with several NGOs, groups working across Jamaica to achieve youth empowerment and representativity, gender equality, conflict resolution, and the development overall of a culture of peace, in particular in difficult urban centers. He's also serving as the chief for the Jamaica Heralders crew, which provides a safe space for hundreds of youth in Jamaica to volunteer in sports and related activities. He's the ambassador for I Believe, a youth empowerment initiative spearheaded by the Governor General of Jamaica. He attended the University of Technology, where he pursued his Bachelor in Communications, Arts and Technology, and he's currently at the University of West Indies pursuing a Bachelor's in International Relations. So I thought it was important to give a detailed presentation because you can see already the richness and the diversity that we have in this amazing group. So we will dive right in. We will start with Antonina and would like to hear from you, Antonina, why participating in 16 by 16 is important to you, and we would like to hear a little bit more about the process and the content of the Rome Youth Call to Action. So Antonina, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Noella. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, great. I will also try to share my screen because oh, it's not working. Yes.
No, we do not see your screen at the moment. Hold on, we will try.
Okay, anyway, so I will start. As Noella presented me, I am a Secretary of EvalYouth, a network of young and emerging evaluators. It's mainly a network for and of young people, and also co-chair of a regional chapter of this network, and actively working also at the national and local level. And I really appreciate that 16 by 16 initiative talking about local and national levels, regional levels, not only about global levels, because a lot of initiatives of young people are actually grassrooted, and it is really important to bring leaders of youth organizations from national and local level to different events and to show their initiatives. I briefly only said about EvalYouth. We started in 2015 as around 20 young evaluators. And during the second Global Evaluation Forum, we created initiatives. And now we have quite numerous participants. We have around 20,000 of people in our social networks, and who are actually participating in our events, webinars, virtual conferences, and mentoring programs. But today I want to be more detailed about our Rome Youth Call for Action, which we created together with 16 by 16 initiative, together 16 youth-led organizations and young leaders. And I really appreciate to be a part of this initiative, as Noella mentioned, that we all are very diverse and all are very professional. And really, it is really a pleasure to work with 15 other young leaders from all over the world and to see what is happening in different parts of the world. What is important to remember that this Rome Youth Call to Action was initiated by 16 by 16 initiative, but also supported by UNDP4Youth, and with active participation of UN Major Group for Children and Youth. And we incorporated results of online consultations with youth organizations and young leaders, and also youth in general, which was presented by Maria. And I really encourage you to look very deeply in details to this Rome Youth Call to Action, because each of statements are very important, and each of statement was discussed very long time, and we paid attention how what to bring in each of statement of this Rome Youth Call to Action. I also want to point out why it's call to action, because we understand as young leaders that we really need to act to come to Agenda 2030 and actively empower youth and young people in order to achieve sustainable development goals, and in particular SDG 16. That's why we call this call to action. And we incorporated several parts of key recommendations in this Rome Youth Call to Actions. First of all, we addressed recommendations regarding peaceful society, just societies, and inclusive societies, which are really creates a main base for achievement of SDG 16. But what is also important, we include two cross-cutting issues, just problematic in this youth call to action. First is it is youth meaningful participation in SDG 16 monitoring, review, follow-up, and accountability. And I will briefly explain what it is, because it is mainly my sphere of interest. And also the last one is equal partnership and financing and linkages with SDG 17. Okay, just briefly explain what we mean by youth meaningful participation in SDG 16 monitoring, review, follow-up, and accountability. It is important to point out that youth can play a different role in the accountability of SDG whole agenda, and in particular SDG 16. And young people can be sources of data and information, and we are mainly like researchers, evaluators, and different stakeholders coming to asking something. Yes, and it's good, because such type of consultations give a lot of understanding of positions of youth and young people. But it is important to point out that it's not enough, because young people should also play active role. And that's why we can be a consultant, like a peer-to-peer consultant, or a consultant to different implementation of particular project within the SDGs, or bigger programs and national programs, at the regional level or global. We also, as the young people, we should be co-creators. And here is responsibility and ownership even bigger. And next level, I think we should be more as leaders, and not only as leaders, as youth activists, but also leaders in accountability of Agenda 2030 and SDG 16. And last but not least, we should be advocates for whole agenda, and also for monitoring and reviewing of Agenda 2030. And I want to point that my network of young and emerging evaluators are playing quite important connecting of youth organizations and young activists and different like grassroots organizations, and give some guidelines and how youth and young people can actually actively be involved in the process of monitoring, evaluation, and reviewing of Agenda 2030, and how we jointly can create accountability of Agenda 2030, and in particular SDG 16. That's why I think that young evaluators can be liaisons between youth and evaluation, monitoring and evaluations. In the end, I want once again to point that we should you should look more deeply in the section of about accountability, but also on other section of call to actions, because each of this part can be developed into different like initiatives or projects, and can be deeply involved at the local, national, and regional and global levels. So this is for me I'm finishing, but if you have any questions, we can discuss.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Antonina. And of course, we can include the slides that you couldn't show on the screen in the consolidated version that we will circulate and post on Youth for Peace website after the webinar. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for building this appetite for the Rome Youth Call to Action, which, in my opinion, is simply the most comprehensive document that I have seen on youth and SDG 16. So well done for that, and I hope that can be that can inform discussions, but also policy and programming moving forward. Really interesting hearing about the breadth also and the scope of this young evaluators network. And what I can say as a practitioner is that we certainly need more evaluations on youth, and evaluations that also emphasize the importance of working with young people and lessons learned from that. So we really hope that through your participation in the 16 by 16, we can also trigger a new series of evaluation and more systematic evaluation of our youth activities. So we will certainly work closely together on that. Thank you very much. We will move now to Emmanuel. Emmanuel from Ghana. It would be really interesting, Emmanuel, to hear more about your work, about your own participation in the 16 by 16, and also specifically what you think makes youth engagement meaningful, and in particular in the SDG 16 implementation and the SDG implementation as a whole in your particular context. Emmanuel, you have the floor.
Hello, good afternoon from Ghana, and thank you very much for the introduction. It is my pleasure to be participating in this webinar and to be sharing my ideas on the subject. So I work with Youth Advocate Ghana as the Executive Director, and Youth Advocate Ghana is a national youth-led non-political organization based in Sawom in the eastern region of the Republic of Ghana. YAG works through its activities and program with young people and children, students, and out-of-school youth in the area of health, education, children's rights, governance, and youth enterprise development. YAG believes that young people are a force for peace, democracy, and equality, and an essential human resource for sustainable development and poverty reduction. YAG works in partnership with youth groups and other organizations who share in the values and principles to work towards eliminating barriers to youth participation in development processes that affect them. Over the past years, we have undertaken a couple of projects, particularly around the SDGs, and provided platforms for young people to participate, both at the national level and also at the continental level. So it is also important for me to mention that one of the key projects that we have implemented in the last few months is around amplifying the voices of young people in the voluntary national review processes that is already ongoing in Ghana, where we collaborated with International Organization of Migration to launch a media campaign where young people had opportunity to provide their views and their perspective in terms of irregular migration and how it affects development of young people. It's also important for me also to mention that YAG serves as the secretariat for the 2030 Youth Alliance for Africa, which works and mobilizes young people in Ghana and across Africa in the SDGs accountability processes through our annual African Youth SDG Summit. The summit ensures that the voices of young people are heard and also provide critical platform for young people to engage, interact, and learn about issues regarding the SDGs and how they can also participate. The summit has evolved also to become an important multi-stakeholder platform with focus on young people and their roles in achieving the SDG target. For me, as a young leader, it is a privilege for me to be selected as one of the 60 by 60 global leaders. And I believe that the work that we do, not only in Ghana and across Africa, are the basis for this role that I've been involved in, and also to highlight the issues that affect young people on the continent. Let me also say that when it comes to accountability of the SDGs and how young people can participate, it's important to mention that the voluntary national review, which allows countries globally to report on the progress that they are making on the SDG, is very critical. And it's important for young people to be aware of that process. And for this year, 2019, the multinational review process is ongoing. And this month, it will be happening at the Highly Political Forum, where about 51 countries will be reporting on the theme, empowering people, ensuring inclusivity and equality. For this year, the target or the goals that this Highly Political Forum will be reviewing are Goal 4, talking about education, Goal 8, talking about promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth for all. Goal 10, reduce inequality. Goal 13, climate action. Goal 16, which is very important, promote peaceful and inclusive society for sustainable development. And obviously, Goal 17, which is means of implementation and partnership for the SDGs. So for me, critically, the Highly Political Forum provides young people with a unique opportunity each year to hold their government accountable for their commitment to end poverty, inequality, climate change, and to provide us with a platform for to strengthen youth engagement in all things related to the SDGs. As I already mentioned, at the Highly Political Forum, government present their voluntary national reviews, which are both written submissions and formal presentations on how they are progressing towards their implementation of the SDGs. The VNRs highlight the challenges, successes, and sustainable development priorities for the future. And government are supposed to engage a whole host of different stakeholders in the development of their report, including, of course, young people. However, we know that many governments fail to run consultative and inclusive processes to gather stakeholders' input and to ensure that the perspectives and priorities of young people are not left out in this process. For me, I believe that when you look at globally today, there are about 1.8 billion young people in the world, and half of this number is under 30. And here in Africa, our continent is also home to over 1.2 billion people, where over 60% of them fall below the age of 25. And so very often we say that young people are seen as the future, but we believe that we are more than the future. We are also today. Our generation are already solving the world's greatest challenges, whether it's around climate, conflict, poverty, right for all, and all of that. And so it is very critical for us that we understand these accountability processes and also to identify our roles in ensuring that our voices are heard at all levels. In terms of what roles young people can play, I believe that young people must learn to bring recognition to their work by preparing shadow reports, by preparing policy briefs and statements that could be presented to their government. Another thing that we can also do is to identify others who are working in the same areas as we, team up with them and work as a formidable front in the engagement processes with the various institutions that have been assigned to work on the reporting at the country level. I also believe that young people and youth organizations must also leverage on their numbers to mobilize, organize, and engage with a united front, as the voice of large numbers cannot be easily ignored. And that is why the African Youth SDG Summit, for which we are hosting in Africa, is seen as a good example of how young people can create their own spaces and use it to engage policymakers on issues that affect them. We must also ensure that we engage duty bearers with relevant information. So very often there are issues happening in our communities that young people are affected with, but they are not able to communicate these issues. And I believe that if we want to ensure the successful implementation of the SDG, particularly SDG 16, we must make sure that we engage our duty bearers with the relevant information that are available onto us. We can also capitalize on videos, on article writings to convey our messages to intended audience and to take advantage of our network and alliances to reach relevant authorities within the work that we do. And it's also important to also mention that the African region, we are witnessing a whole lot of young people taking actions within their own organizations, within their communities, and it's important to sustain this gain so that we provide that enabling environment and to make sure that the voices of young people can reflect not only at the national report, but can also be carried to the Highly Political Forum. And in this vein, I would like to also recommend that our national delegation, national government, who are going to be participating in the Highly Political Forum, it's important that they include youth delegation. And in this sense, I'm not only talking about the fact that we, the government, identify one or two people who are already going to the summit on their own, but the government should be able to create a system or a process that allows a diverse group of people to engage in the process, and that they also provide transparent processes in identifying and selecting youth delegates that will be part of the government delegation to attend these meetings. I think that this will be my thought for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Very rich contribution. We're really thrilled also that given your experience with the VNR and with the SDG implementation and monitoring, that you will be joining us for the HLPF here in New York in a few days. We really look forward to also sharing experiences when it comes to Youth Delegates program, as you just mentioned that. Access to information, as you said, is really key as well. And there will be a number of discussions with the youth constituencies here during the HLPF around VNR labs to share experiences of young people contributing or not, perhaps being enough able to contribute to VNR processes and SDG reporting. So hopefully you can participate in these discussions. Thank you very much for the great work that you're doing, and we will have more opportunities to exchange in the Q&A. In terms of the article writings as well, I mean, just a heads up for our participants, there is a blog series that will be launched, I mean, in the lead up to the SDG Summit. So each of you will have the opportunity to highlight a particular angle related to youth empowerment and youth participation in the context of SDG 16. And we look forward to that, because having these local perspectives by young people have certainly enriched the quality of the debates on SDG 16. Thank you very much. We'll move now to Lynn Rose. Lynn Rose from the Philippines. We would like to hear more, of course, about your experience, about your work at the local level in Mindanao, and whether you could share in particular why you think that the work on inclusivity and on meaningful engagement of young people in all their diversity is really key. Lynn Rose, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Noella, for the introduction. I hope I'm clear enough. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Right. Okay. So I am Lynn Rose Jane Hannon. I'm from a young woman from Mindanao, Philippines, and I believe that young women and men individually and collectively are critical actors in the implementation of SDG 16. And I think my fellow participants in the 16 by 16 initiative has highlighted that as well. I am a member, as mentioned, of the Executive Council of Young Women Plus for Peace and Leadership, and a co-project director of Youth Amplifying, Co-Creating, and Advocating for Peace, or Project Yakap. And tonight I'll be talking about the work that we do and how is it aligned with our youth call to action, and why is it critical in the implementation of SDG 16. So to start with, Young Women Plus for Peace and Leadership is a youth program and a network which aims to empowering young women and LGBT leaders to become peace builders in the Philippines. It provides a space and network for young women to participate in peace initiatives and be heard. It started in 2018, where 28 young women leaders from across the country, representing sectors from the academe, civil society, security, local government, and indigenous peoples, were brought together for a youth training on women, peace, and security, and its intersection with human rights and the media. The training was organized by the Global Network of Women Peace Builders and the Center for Peace Education from Miriam College. We placed Philippines in our name because this program is also implemented in different parts of the world, such as in Indonesia, Bangladesh, South Sudan, and Democratic Republic of Congo. We are the only ones with a plus in our name because we also support the LGBTQIA+ rights. Our network uses social media as a platform to promote accountability to gender equality, women's rights, human rights, and peace-building policies. And you may be asking, why social media? Well, in the Philippines, we are social. We top the world in terms of social media usage, as the number of the internet users in the country hitting 67 million people, with an average of 3 hours and 57 minutes time spent mainly on Facebook. And that's a good data to capitalize on. So we have organized Twitter parties, online campaigns on events such as the International Day of Peace, commemoration of the declaration of martial law in the Philippines, Day of Nonviolence, Human Rights, and Women's Day, and the like. And besides our online engagements, we also have organized youth community discussions to increase awareness of youth on our civic political responsibilities. We organized a forum and campaign on Bangsamoro Organic Law during the plebiscites early this year, and to aid the lower voters turnout among the youth in the previous national and local elections in the country, and also to prepare for the recently conducted midterm elections, we also organized youth discussion to impartially educate young voters on the systemic implications of voting, criteria in selecting political leaders, and ways to prevent voter intimidation among young local voters. And this is also a platform that we use to educate young voters on the importance of informed voting, and also identifying and preventing voter intimidation, vote buying, voter fraud, fake news, and also, most importantly, to mobilize young local voters in raising awareness on the election and to increase the participation of young people in the political decision making. So at present, our network is composed of 22 member youth organizations in the Philippines, and these organizations are represented by a total of 39 young women and young LGBT leaders. So besides the collective effort of our network, I think it is also important to mention that individuals who are part of our network are already engaged in promoting gender equality, women's rights, human rights, and in peace building efforts individually. For example, I am the co-project director of Project Yakap, and Yakap is a youth-led network created by a six-month youth leadership program for peace, which was one of the recipients of a small grants from the U.S. Embassy Manila. So the program is in response, actually the program was created in response to the Marawi siege in 2017, which is a 5-month-long armed conflict in Marawi, Lanao del Sur rather, which is actually an hour away from the place that I'm living in. So it started with 30 young leaders in Mindanao who have undergone a leadership training and who then implemented peace projects in their communities. And currently the network has 300 youth members in Mindanao. So I've mentioned all these because these are the works that we do with meager resources and capacitating on the strengths of young people in our community. And I believe that we can sustain and amplify our existing initiatives if we ensure that the implementation of SDG 16 will be more inclusive, as stated and emphasized in the Rome Youth Call to Action. So when I talk about, I think, inclusivity in this sense, it means recognizing that youth is a diverse group. So there's a need to systematically gather disaggregated data by age and gender, because gender is one axis of difference when we talk about young people. When gender intersects with other forms of identity like age, if you are a woman and you are young, you have different experiences and needs, and most of the time you are disproportionately affected by the social challenges in the community. And young women are one of the worst impacted, as for example, in our community, as patriarchal values continue to reinforce women's lack of socioeconomic power, and women are more susceptible to poverty. And among the barriers for young women for meaningful participation is, well, lack of financial resources, few capacity building and mentorship support opportunities, lack of exposure and visibility, and insufficient access to relevant networks, and due to social factors such as gender, illiteracy, and isolation of marginalized groups, to mention some. So for young women, being inclusive is addressing this multiple and cross-cutting barriers that young women face, such as gender roles and stereotypes and economic exclusion. And second, inclusivity, I think for me and for our network, means creating more opportunities for young women and men to reinforce our agency, not just the need for protection. One is creating opportunities to share our expertise, develop them, and receive validation and support, especially for youth with less experience. Another is through linking us up with other youth groups for increased recognition of the power of our collective voice. For example, capacity building programs and networks such as Young Women Plus for Peace and Leadership had brought together otherwise unconnected or less connected young women from the Philippines, and we have come up with initiatives that we have not had individually. So our network has given us a platform to explore potential platforms for collective expression and action and amplify our individual works. It was Project Yakap that made me part of the Young Women Network. And it is Yakap and Young Women Network that introduced me to the 16 by 16 initiative. So from a local platform to national and global, and this has widened the reach of our stories and allowed us to transform our participation from presence to influence. And 16 by 16 initiative reinforces our agency to influence policies like, for example, the Rome call to action and being part of the VNR discussion and participating in high-level political forum, for example. And lastly, inclusivity for me, I think, means creating mechanisms to work with youth organizations or groups of young people as partners. There is a need, I think, to continue to challenge ideas of hierarchy and top-down culture in organizations that are prevalent in the community that I come from, allowing young women and men to be in charge and be meaningfully included in the implementation of SDG 16 in the more horizontal and participative and less bureaucratic organizational structures and processes. And I think these are some of the points that the Rome Youth Call to Action is actually centered on. And I think that's all from me, and I'm open for discussions and questions.
Absolutely great. Thank you very much, Lynn Rose. I mean, you raised so many of the issues. I feel that we talked almost about all the SDG targets, all the SDG 16 targets. It's really impressive, the work that you're doing on educating young voters, preventing voters intimidation, really addressing very complex issues in the context of Mindanao, Bangsamoro. It's really, really impressive. Thank you for reminding us as well that youth is a diverse group, that the youth agenda is a gender agenda, and vice versa, and that we really hope that, you know, more practitioners can be really aware of that and practice that. Thank you very much. We also look forward to having you in New York during the HLPF. You will be participating in the Goal 16 Plus event on the 16th of July. So we're really thrilled to hear that you will be able to bring these important local perspectives and the emphasis on inclusivity. This is amazing. Thank you very much, Lynn Rose. We will now move to Neville from Jamaica. Neville, you work in a context where you're supporting the reduction of violence and really emphasizing the positive role that young people can play. So rather than, you know, seeing young people as a potential at-risk population or at risk of being violent population, you're really harnessing youth power to make a difference in your community. So could you tell us a bit more about your work to build peace and how 16 by 16 can be harnessed in your important work? Thank you very much, Neville. You have the floor.
All right, so good morning, everyone. Noel already introduced me, so I'm going to just jump straight into it, into one of my favorite quotes, and that is, in order to build peaceful communities, you have to really consider young people as partners for peace. Because when youth have safe spaces to engage without fear of discrimination, then when all is said and done, they have a better chance to contribute to peace and social cohesion, not just locally, but also internationally. I'm going to look at the statistics because the majority of the work that we do is really focused around partnership, especially as it relates to SDG 17, which also in line with SDG 16, because in order to achieve peace, justice, and strong institution, we have to look at creating partnerships that can support youth-led initiatives and youth-led movement. So I did a little research, and in Jamaica's national youth policy, the youth populace is the population that is most affected by crime and violence, both as victims and also as perpetrators. And in the policy, the research also shows that in the Caribbean, looking at it from a Caribbean context, crime and violence are the main concerns of young people. And the Caribbean also noted the highest homicide rates in the world, with the homicide rates for male being 15 to 25 years, being 3 times the global average. And estimates also show that young people between under the age of 35 commit 80% of crime and violence in the region. Right, so and violence is really from gang activities and conflicts that affect young people. And studies have also shown that violence are related to various factors, such as a high level of employment, high level of poverty, inequality, not enough educational opportunities. And it also ties in now with why are we looking forward to developing a culture of peace? Why are we really working with young people? Crime and violence, it affects all of us, both locally and regionally. And in order to really engage young people, we have to identify projects and opportunities that they can engage in that create safe spaces for them to really give back at the time and the energy, and also provide opportunities for them. So the work that the organization is doing really focus on volunteers in peace building and also creating spaces for young people to positively give back at the time to ensure the development of Jamaica. And it also have a ripple effect because each one can reach one. And the aim is that if we can reach one person, that one individual, that one young person can have a ripple effect across the world. And the 16 by 16 initiative is really a great initiative to really enhance or to really push our own agenda, which is youth development. And 16 by 16 is also a great way to partner to also have it, because apart from 16 by 16 international, we're also looking forward to working with 16 youth-led organizations in Jamaica itself. And I think might be from the smallest country, the smallest island, but we are really looking at making a ripple effect, not just in Jamaica, but throughout the Caribbean. And I know a lot of my Caribbean friends and neighbors would really look forward to an initiative like this, because the work that young people do both locally and regionally, it have a great effect. Now let's look at the work of the government and also private and public sectors in supporting youth development. The government plays an important role in supporting development, both as policies and implementation, because without the government backing young people, despite whatever political parties, then right, what the work that we are doing will basically go unnoticed. As well as let's look at the government role in support in developing policies that really push youth development, youth engagement, and also youth empowerment. Then look at civil society organizations locally. This is where the cash is, and a lot of the issues in achieving SDG 16 and a lot of the problem is that young people, we want to make a difference, but the capital and the funding is not there. So this is where civil society and also private and public sector come into play. When private and public sector can make a dedicated push to really fund initiative, then young people will feel appreciated and their work can also have a far-reaching effect. Also, the government needs, from time to time, the government or even organizations take young people as they take a tokenistic approach to it, where they do it one time and then that's it. What we want to do is push away from that. We want it to be a case where we are doing it for the long term and we are doing it for the good of the society. And some of the projects that we really have in Jamaica is really focused on, young people making a positive contribution, right? And a lot of my colleagues said it earlier, but I'm also re-emphasizing it, that in order to make a change, it really starts with each and every one of us. In order for us to go out and say we are going to make a difference, it all starts with us right here, right now. So, in a nutshell, I won't prolong it because I know that various persons are pressing for questions and answer. I just want to leave by saying, that change, it really starts with each and every one of us. If we really want to create a culture of peace, a culture of respect, and a culture of tolerance, we have to use our voices. We have to make our voices be heard, and we have to stand firm in what we believe. And we really need to speak out, take a stand, and show that we care. And 16 by 16, look out for it, because there's a lot more in store. And even if you are wondering what can you do to make a difference, what can you do to play a part in the peace building process, it's easy. Identify a club, identify an organization that is promoting peace building or is working towards peace, justice, and strong institution. Antonia said it, Emmanuel said it, Lynn Rose also said it. They're all part of organizations, and there are organizations all across the world in various countries. Join an organization, let your voice be heard in that organization, amplify your own personal message. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you all heard Neville's very inspiring call for action. Also to all of you, as you said, I mean the change that we expect to see is institutional, but is also individual and starts with young people themselves. The ripple effect is another keyword that I would like to underline. Certainly, the point of the 16 by 16 is to generate typically more 16 by 16s at the national level, at the local level. It'd be fantastic if each participant in the 16 by 16 initiative could involve at least 16 partners at the country level, etc., etc. And we can brainstorm certainly endlessly about what phase 2 could look like. What we want is both to expand we actually want to expand to new countries, to deepen the partnerships with each and every one of you at the national and local level. And we also want to provide an opportunity for you to also engage with more organizations, with more entities led by young people that would be interested in more formally linking up their work with SDG 16 achievement. Really important points that you made on crime and violence, and how we can support the role that young people play in awareness raising, in data collection, in building peace at the community level. Volunteerism is also a key component very often of this community and youth-led projects. Thank you very much for emphasizing that. We're thinking about many entry points and many partnerships potentially also at the regional level. We have a program with USAID called Carry Secure, and we hope that you can connect with them. Thank you very much. So now I will take a few questions. Basically, the questions coming from participants online pretty much are about how to join the 16 by 16. So the 16 by 16 at the moment is really it's a pilot initiative. We wanted to see, how we could best harness this type of global campaign that is really about also making more connections at the local and national level. It's a good way also for our own country offices to harness such initiatives, to think about new ways in which young people can be involved. We have a number of regional programs, the Youth Connect in Africa, the Youth Collab in Asia Pacific, the Arab Youth Leadership Program that can be that are very much connected to civic engagement, that are connected to social entrepreneurship, that are connected to young people having a voice in decision making and in development. So we hope that we can create linkages. There is a question in particular from Nigeria about the 16 by 16. So at the moment, we're not covering Nigeria, but again, in the phase 2, this is always a possibility, and we will gladly put you in touch with our colleagues in the region around Youth Connect. There will be a summit in October in Rwanda with young people from the continent. So you might be interested in joining that. What we really want with the 16 by 16 is we wanted to hear directly from young people and create spaces for young people themselves to say and to illustrate the work that they're already doing. This is leadership in action. This is such an excellent way of articulating also why SDG 16 is an enabler for the agenda. I mean, everything that you've said today, I mean, just illustrate also how, first of all, the potential that is completely untapped sitting with young people, and the fact that you see challenges and development challenges in such an integrated way. And I think we're really interested in supporting this paradigm shift and in really bringing comprehensive solutions to today's challenges and tomorrow's challenges. Thank you for the very important work that you do. And I want to also offer the possibility to the four panelists to perhaps ask questions to one another. I don't know whether you have, for instance, Emmanuel would like to react on what Neville said, or Lynn Rose on what Antonina said. Please feel free to come in if you would like to make another comment. We have about 5 minutes left. Thank you. Does anyone would like to come in? Lynn Rose?
Yeah, I think I would comment on Antonina's part, and because I think when we were in Rome, we were talking about like collaboration and strengthening and creating more spaces to train young people and capacitate them to conduct evaluation, because it's a crucial also part, especially for young people who are implementing programs and projects in the communities. And in our community, there's not much opportunities to actually practice and capacitate practitioners, young practitioners, and evaluating and assessing the sustainability of our initiatives. And I think it's a very crucial part of project implementations and in the work that we do. So I think Antonina's work is very, very important, and also, like bringing it to other communities, especially in the grassroots level. So, yep.
Sorry, I was mute. So yes, thank you very much for that comment, Lynn Rose. Would anyone want to come in? Otherwise, what I would like to flag in the meantime is that after a meeting that we had with the deputy minister in Italy, we also decided to prepare a publication with all your stories, because literally, I mean, everyone in the room when the group of 16 by 16 was gathered, I cannot even begin to say how many goosebumps we all had hearing your perspectives, hearing your personal stories, hearing really these empowerment stories that you were putting on the table and really sharing. And we feel that sharing that with the broader community, making that more visible, is a critical objective of this initiative. So we will be starting very, very soon to develop those individual stories with you holding the pen. And we hope that we can also lift a number of promising practices and case studies on, partnerships with youth, the role that UNDP can play at country level in harnessing youth potential, the work that we can do collaborative with other UN entities, etc., and just really illustrating and triggering a new generation of policies and programs when it comes to youth in decision making, youth in accountability, the protection and promotion of the rights of human rights defenders, etc., which are all critical issues. So we have a lot of work on our plate. I mean, first of all, the HLPF with a number of events and a number of discussions and brainstorming on what the phase 2 will look like. And we really welcome any comments, any ideas from partners that might be connected, and really the deepening of your individual connections through your organizations at country level with our UNDP country offices, and also the expansion of the 16 by 16 at country level. With that, I mean, if there is no additional comments, we will leave you. I would like to thank Maria for organizing the webinar and the presentation on the consultation. And as I said, you can follow us on UNDP4Youth on our Twitter account, where you really have daily updates on our work, and in particular a lot of featuring of the 16 by 16 participants. Thank you very much for participating in this first webinar. This is the first in a long series as well of UNDP4Youth webinar, where we will feature colleagues from the field reflecting on projects, and in the spirit of more evaluation and lessons learned sharing, we hope to keep that quite frequent. Thank you very much to everyone, and the recording will be made available as soon as possible. Thank you. Thank you very much.